The Keurig was still running when I walked through the front door. I wasn't supposed to be home until Thursday. The Chicago conference had wrapped 2 days early. A merger fell through. The client canceled the closing dinner, and my managing partner told everyone to just go home. I'd caught the last direct flight out of O'Hare, texted no one, figured I'd surprise my husband with takeout from the Thai place on Clement Street that he always said we never went to enough. The porch light was off. His car was in the driveway. So was another one. A white Audi I recognized immediately, because I'd ridden in it to brunch at least a dozen times. My sister-in-law had bought it last spring. She'd made us all come outside to see it. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself that while I stood on my own front porch, key in hand, not going inside. My husband's name is Daniel. We'd been married for 4 years. He was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm, coached youth soccer on Saturdays, made excellent pancakes. We didn't have the kind of marriage that ended up in stories like this. That's what I thought. The explanation I was waiting for didn't come. I went inside. The Keurig was mid-cycle on the counter. 2 mugs already on the drying rack, the kind of detail that hits you later, after everything else, and somehow hurts the most. They'd already had coffee. They were comfortable. This wasn't the first time. I heard them before I reached the stairs. I'm not going to describe the sound. Anyone who has stood at the bottom of their own staircase and heard what I heard knows exactly what I mean, and anyone who hasn't, I hope they never do. I didn't go up. My legs wouldn't move in that direction. Some part of my brain, the quiet, practical part that had gotten me through a bar exam and 2 cross-country moves at my mother's funeral, took over. It said, "You need proof. Not for yourself. You already know. For everything that comes after." My phone was in my jacket pocket. I opened it. I walked to the foot of the stairs. I recorded 2 minutes and 40 seconds of audio. That was enough. Then I walked back out to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and did not cry. I want to be clear about that, because people always assume you cry. I didn't. I sat completely still and watched the neighbor's sprinkler system run its Tuesday night cycle, and thought about the fact that Daniel and I had argued last October about whether to get a sprinkler system installed. I'd said yes. He'd said it was unnecessary. We'd compromised on nothing, the way you do when you're married and you think you have time to revisit every small decision. Her name is Renata. She'd been my closest friend since graduate school. We'd been in each other's weddings. Her daughter called me Auntie Claire. I drove to a hotel 4 miles away and checked in under my own name because I wasn't thinking clearly enough to do anything else. I didn't sleep. What I did instead was think about the timeline. The mind does that. It starts auditing everything, pulling out receipts from memory. The canceled dinners that made sense now. The way Renata had stopped initiating plans with me around 18 months ago, but always had a reason ready. The conference 2 years back where Daniel had bumped into her and they'd had a drink and he'd mentioned it casually over dinner the next week like it was nothing, because it wasn't nothing, it was the beginning, and he was testing how it sounded out loud. I'm a contracts attorney. I build cases for a living. By 3 a.m., I had a list. By 4 a.m., I had the name of an investigator. His name was found through a colleague who handled high-conflict divorces. She'd used him twice, she said. Thorough, discreet, doesn't overcharge. His firm was called Meridian Investigative Group. She sent me the contact while I was still in the hotel room because I'd called her at 3:47 in the morning, and she answered on the second ring because some friendships hold and some don't, and you find out which is which in moments exactly like that one. I booked a consultation for the following morning. I went home at 6 a.m. before Daniel would be awake, took a shower, repacked my bag, and left a note on the counter that said the conference had extended and I'd be back Friday. I made it sound normal. I made it sound like the version of me that didn't know yet. It was the hardest thing I've ever written in my life, and I've drafted closing arguments that made partners cry. The Meridian office was in a nondescript building in the Sunset District, 2nd floor, waiting room with generic landscape prints and a water cooler that gurgled every few minutes. The investigator I was meeting was named Frank. His assistant had told me that when I called, I sat in the waiting room and filled out the intake form and wrote my husband's name in the box that said subject of investigation and felt the specific vertigo of doing something that cannot be undone. The door to the inner office opened. I looked up. The man standing there was in his early 40s, dark hair going gray at the temples, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had Daniel's jaw. The same jaw I'd looked at across the breakfast table for 4 years. He had Daniel's jaw because he was Daniel's older brother. His name isn't Frank. His name is Marcus. Marcus Reeves. Daniel's brother, 7 years older. The one who'd moved up to Portland before Daniel and I met. The one who came to the wedding and gave a toast that made everyone laugh. The one who'd sent us a cast iron skillet for our anniversary and a sympathy card when my mother passed. I had his number in my phone under Marcus D's brother. He didn't recognize me right away. I was in a blazer I didn't usually wear and people look different outside of context, and he was glancing at his clipboard. Then he looked up fully and I watched his face do something complicated and involuntary. "Claire," he said. Not a question, not a greeting really, just my name, like he was confirming something. "Marcus," I said. We stood there in the doorway of his investigative firm for a moment that I cannot accurately measure in seconds because it felt like it had its own gravitational field. "You should come in," he said finally, and closed the door. I did. He didn't offer me coffee. He sat behind his desk and I sat across from it and he folded his hands on the surface in front of him and said, "Tell me why you're here." And I did. All of it. The early flight, the car in the driveway, the recording, Renata, the timeline I'd built in the hotel room. I put my phone on the desk and played him the audio and watched his face stay controlled in the way of someone who has trained themselves to receive information professionally, except for a muscle in his jaw that moved once, tightened, and then went still. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known about the firm?" he asked. "Since this morning. A colleague referred me." "She doesn't know you're—" I stopped. "She didn't know the connection." He nodded slowly. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to tell me right now if you can't do this. If it's a conflict. I understand if it is. I'll go somewhere else." He looked at me for a long time, long enough that I started to feel the particular vulnerability of having just told a near stranger, a stranger who shared DNA with the man who had betrayed me, the worst thing that had happened in my adult life. Then he said, "I've known something was wrong with Daniel for about a year. I didn't know what. He stopped calling. Started being vague about your plans when I asked. Last Christmas he was off. I couldn't name it. He picked up the folder with my intake form in it. I can do this," he said. "Ethically, I need to disclose the relationship on the file, but I can do this." I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. "There's something else," he said. He set the folder down and looked at me directly. "Whatever I find, and based on what you've told me, I don't think it'll take long. I want you to understand that I will document it fully and accurately. I won't shape it, I won't soften it. Not for you and not for him." "That's all I'm asking," I said. "Okay." He stood and extended his hand. "Then let's start." The next 11 days were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner and had conversations with my husband about his day and whether we should repaint the hallway and whether his mother was feeling better after her knee surgery. I performed the marriage while Marcus Reeves quietly documented the evidence that it was already over. He was good at his job. That much became clear quickly. The reports came in secure PDFs, time-stamped photographs, cell tower data, financial records obtained through proper channels. The first one arrived on day 3, and I read it in my parked car outside my office building, and when I was done, I drove to the parking garage on the next block and cried for exactly 11 minutes, and then drove back and finished my workday. There was a pattern that went back further than 18 months. There were hotel stays charged to a credit card I hadn't known existed. There was a weekend Daniel had told me was a work retreat in Tahoe, that Renata had told me was a family thing in Sacramento. They had been in Carmel. I'd been at home grading deposition prep with a glass of wine, thinking I had the better end of the deal, a quiet weekend to myself. On day 9, Marcus called me. "I have what you need," he said. "Enough for the attorney. Enough for the court." I asked him what enough looked like. He told me. "I won't repeat all of it. Some of it I've worked on forgetting. There's one more thing," he said, and his voice changed slightly. "Not professional, not careful anymore, just a person's voice. I've been going back and forth on whether to tell you this, but I think you'd want to know. Tell me. The credit card, the one he kept separate, in the last 8 months there are 3 charges to a travel agency, not hotels, trips, international." "He hasn't been out of the country," I said. "I would know." "They're not booked yet," Marcus said. "They're deposits. Future bookings." A silence opened up between us on the phone. "He's been planning to leave," I said. Not a question. "It looks that way." He wasn't just cheating, Claire. He was building an exit. I sat with that for a moment. The specific cruelty of it. Not that he'd fallen into something, but that he'd been laying groundwork. Planning a future. In that future, I was apparently not a person to be left and grieved and honest about, but an obstacle to manage until the time was right. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "I'm sorry for both things. That he did this, and that you had to find out here, like this. Don't be. I'd rather know." "I know. That's why I told you." I had the full report delivered to my attorney the next morning. She read it in front of me in 30 minutes, made a sound that wasn't quite a word, and then looked up and said, "This is comprehensive," which from her is the equivalent of applause. We filed 14 days after I'd walked into that hotel room on a Tuesday night. Daniel found out through his attorney the way you're supposed to when the other person has retained counsel, which he apparently had not thought to do yet because he had not thought this was coming. My attorney told me his attorney told her that he had been blindsided, that word specifically. I thought about that word for a while. I turned it over. He had been blindsided. I had been betrayed. Those are different things. He called me the night the papers were served. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times. On the 4s I picked up, not because I wanted to, but because my attorney had said I could, that there was nothing legally problematic about a brief civil conversation, and because I wanted to hear what he would say. What he said was my name, and then nothing for a moment, and then, "I don't understand how you did this without me knowing." And I thought, that is exactly the right question, and you will never fully have the answer. What I said was, I'd like to keep this to written communication going forward. You have my attorney's contact, and I hung up. The divorce took 7 months. That's fast by the standards of these things, and it was fast because of the evidence, because Daniel's own credit card trail effectively dismantled any argument he could have made about asset division. He kept the car. I kept the house, which I then sold, because I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want the kitchen where the Keurig had been running, or the staircase, or the neighbor's sprinkler system, or any of it. I kept the cast iron skillet, though. That was Marcus's gift, not Daniel's. Renata never reached out. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even a text. Her daughter still has my number in her phone, I imagine, under Auntie Claire. I try not to think about that. What I think about instead is the conversation I had with Marcus the day the divorce was finalized. He called, not as my investigator, the case had been closed for months by then, but as himself. He asked if I was okay. Not in the way people ask when they want a short answer, but in the way of someone who has some professional and some personal investment in the question. I told him I was, and I mostly meant it. He said he'd had a long conversation with Daniel the previous month that had not gone well. That there had been things said that he didn't think they'd come back from. I said I was sorry. He said he wasn't sure I should be. He made choices, Marcus said. All the way down the line he made choices. I can be his brother without pretending that isn't true. I thought about that. The idea of being able to hold both things, love for someone and clarity about what they've done. The way it isn't a contradiction, it's just the harder version of honesty. "You're a good person, Marcus," I said. "I'm a thorough investigator," he said, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like a very long time. I live in a different neighborhood now. Different side of the city, smaller apartment, more light. I took a partner track case that required 18 months of work that I threw myself into completely, which helped. I ran a half marathon in the fall, which I'd been meaning to do for 3 years and had always found a reason to postpone. The colleague who referred me to Meridian, the one who answered at 3:47 in the morning, came to the finish line with a sign that said, "Faster tan your ear, X-line," with the sign that your leaves salise and glitter letters, which I told her was embarrassing and which made me cry a little, the good kind. I think about the version of me who stood on the porch that night, key in hand, waiting for an explanation. I want to tell her, go inside. Get your phone. You don't need the explanation. What you need the explanation. What you need is the evidence, and then the exit, and then the long, slow work of building something new. You are more capable of all three than you currently believe. The Keurig in my new kitchen is mine alone. I bought it myself. It runs when I tell it to. That's a small thing. I know that's a small thing. But some mornings it's exactly enough.